Welcome to part 3 of our DIY deck build series. In part 2, we framed up the deck itself, and now it's onto the stairs. This giant staircase turned out so solid, it honestly feels like you're walking up concrete.
Before it was like a loose banana swaying out in the wind.
And in this video, we're breaking down how we pulled it off.
The deck itself is now completely framed and ready for waterproofing. However, we still do have one major last framing component, which is replacing this flimsy aluminum ladder with a good solid set of stairs. That's what I'm gonna get started on right now. I did a whole stair framing video in detail when we did our main stairs, and the stairs going here are almost an exact copy of that. I just pressure washed our landing slab here for a nice clean base. If you recall way back to our slab pour video, we had some extra concrete, so I formed some random slabs up on the ground and we were able to use one of them for our stair landing. We'll also have an intermediate support here, which are these two footings here. I covered that more in the deck footing video. And I have these post offcuts in there because they will absolutely destroy your shin with those metal brackets, and it blends in like perfectly with the stone. So that's just a safety measure of sorts. And the last connection point for the stairs is obviously this ledger up here. So we made a 3-ply 2x10 beam, not only for extra rigidity here, but for railing blocking. And my plan was to use these Simpson LSC stair stringer supports to hang our stair ledger off of. What I did not realize though is that this does not work well on a 2x10 unless you're doing flush mount stairs where the top stair comes all the way to the top of the platform. A 2x10 is not deep enough to accommodate that top riser. There's just not enough height on the board relative to where the top riser has to sit, which is that line right here. So I thought about it, and I think the easiest way to get around this is to lag on a 2x12 to drop this down a little bit more, and it will just pop my run out another 1.5 inches. I considered doing a flush mount stringer where that top step is flush with the deck, but the more I thought about it, it was gonna mess up my railing post plan, so I decided to just stick with the easy route. I'll use a whole bunch of those Simpson, probably 6-inch lags, staggered in a pattern here to add another piece on this ledger. So this is gonna be quite the beam here. The next step was to get a good accurate measurement of our total rise, so the distance from the concrete slab top to the top of our platform. That was actually really easy with a laser. I was able to set the laser at the height of the slab, then just hang a tape measure down from my platform and see where that laser intersects, which was 10 foot 1.5 inches. And I need to add 1 inch for my deck board. So our total rise from slab to finished deck surface is 10 foot 2.5 inches. Then I broke out the handy Construction Master Pro calculator, which allows me to work in inches and feet. Amazing for us Americans and our stupid unit system. I popped that total rise in, had my tread width set as 11 inches, and it spit out the riser height of 6 13/16 of an inch, so almost a perfect 7-11 stair. There's 17 treads, 18 risers, 32-degree angle, which is really comfortable to walk up. Like I said, it's basically the same as what we have, and I love that staircase. We get so many compliments from people who walk up on that, how nice the treads are. We have a 1-inch overhang planned as well, so the full tread is a foot wide, and with just under a 7-inch rise, it's extremely comfortable and safe feeling to walk up. This is the first of my 5 pressure-treated 2x12 20 boards that we're gonna be turning into stair stringers. Typically, you'd only do 4 stringers for a staircase this wide. It's gonna be roughly 44 inches. However, the reason we're doing 5 is because of the span of our deck boards. I think their rated span is only 9 or 10 inches. So to make sure that there's no sags in between the stringers of this composite deck board, we're doing a 5th stringer equally spaced. And it actually works out well because we need to put blocking on either side of the steps because our posts for the railings are surface mounted. So we need to have some pretty heavy duty blocking in there. And by adding an extra stringer, that blocking doesn't have to span so far. It's gonna be a little bit more solid, and there's less horizontal surface for water to accumulate on and eventually start rotting things out. So I whipped out some scrap plywood, made my gauge block again. This is my 11-inch tread width. This is my 6 13/16 riser height. And then I have a diagonal from the calculator of 12 15/16 inches. And this block allows me to slide this anywhere on the board and start making marks. So I started up here at the top, and every 12 15/16 inches, slid it down and traced out the template for a fully marked stringer. A tip that I mentioned in the last video that I learned from Kyle at R&R Buildings and Tim Mueller from Awesome Framers, to make sure you don't accumulate air on your stair stringers as you're sliding that gauge block along, is to first hook a tape on one end, and every diagonal length of your gauge block, in my case 12 15/16 of an inch, make a tick mark all the way down the stringer with the tape strung strung the whole way, using your construction calculator to tell you what the intervals are. So in my case, it's something really weird. So I just added that twice and then just kept hitting equals on the calculator to add one every time. And that gave me my number mark. So first one was 12 and 15/16. Next one was 25 inches of something. Next one was 32 and so forth. Going all the way till the end, the construction calculator makes that super, super simple. Then you're not trying to eyeball where this has got to slide to next based on your last line. You have little tick marks that you can easily just center the block between, and that way you're not gaining error as you move one way down the stringer. At my bottom end, when I got to my last tread, I drew a square line using my framing square, and then another square line from that, so that this height is my riser height minus my tread height, which is 1 inch. So this, instead of being 6 and 13/16, is 5 and 13/16, and these are both offcut. So this bottom edge will bear on my slab. Similar deal at my top step here, just drew a square line down from that. These will both get cut off, and this is the part that will mount to my 2x12 ledger up top. We're ready to cut this thing out now and give it a good test fit. It's already scorching hot out here. It's like 9 in the morning. These sun hats are essential. Thank you, Sashco, for sending this one out. Time to break out the circular saw, the jigsaw, and cut these stringers out. I'm gonna be cutting on the line because I traced around my template, so I'm gonna try to take the line with every cut. Got a little sidetracked after cutting this guy the other day, but I'm back at it again today to finish up this, get it test fit, and hopefully I can get all the rest of them up by the end of today as well. I had to do 2 other minor cuts on this to make it truly ready for testing. The first was at the top step. I needed to take off 1.5 inches off the very back end of it to compensate for the width that I'll be adding on the front of the riser here. If I didn't do that, this top step would be 1.5 inches longer than it should be, and that's no good. So we had to take that off. That way, once we add this riser, we will have a proper 11-inch tread width. The header that this mounts against will not be getting an additional 1.5 inch rough riser, so that's why we have to do that. And at the bottom step, I removed a 1 inch by 3.5 inch, basically a 5/4 by 4 section out of here. There will be a kicker board that spans all 5 of these stringers, and I'm going to be cutting that out of some 1x stock. I didn't want to use 2x because it's just another extra big chunk that is not really necessary for the intended purpose. And if you take out too much, I've read about these 2 corners forming a crack between one another, and that's not what we want either. So I took out just enough to fasten a kicker board to up through here and then down into the concrete slab. Before test fitting the stringer, I'm going to add the piece of 2x12 for a header that I need. So I decided to take some time to lay out where each of the stringers is going to land on this guy. I measured down from the top edge my tread height of 6 and 13/16, put a line across all of them. Then I broke out the manual for the Simpson LSC stair stringer hangers. There's dimension in there that the top edge of this needs to be 4 1/8 inches minimum from the bottom of the board so that the screws aren't too close to the edge down here. Put a little tick mark right here to represent that 4 1/8 inch, while the line represents the 6 and 13/16 of an inch. Here's what I'm running into though. The stringer hanger, when it's at its very minimum location, and my stringer, I'm going to represent it with this. This is 7.5 inches long. This is the piece that I cut off. When I line the top edge of this up with where the stringer is going to be landing, the bottom edge of this is kind of right in line with where this flange bends up on the stringer hanger. And I know that's not going to bend very easily. So I think I'm going to cheat this down just a little bit. I'm going to take it down another 1/8 inch. That should open this up a little bit more. It's not perfect, but it'll at least let me make that bend. Why this matters right now is because I need to route out a little recess in here so that I can fit not only this strap, but the screws that I'm going to be using without them interfering with the stringers that are setting up against them. I don't want the thickness of these materials adding to the overall width of that top tread. So I broke out the handy trim router with a 1/2 inch bit on it, and I'm going to route out little recesses where each one of these are. I'm also cheating a little bit on the end, technically because this header is just a little bit cantilevered over the support. There's supposed to be a minimum offset from the edge of the board, 3.5 inches to the edge, and I'm not going to quite get there. This guy's going to be right here at the edge, but I will pre-drill these to make sure that this does not split. And we have 4 other stringers, which is typically 1 more than you'd see on a staircase this wide. So I'm not really too worried about it, but in theory, if I was following everything to a T, I'd have to make my staircase a little bit narrower and put this here. That turned out quite nicely. The stringers will now sit flush on there and they're not too far down. They are supported by the screws underneath, so that'll work good. The screws do pop through just a hair, so I'm not gonna put all of them in right now, just enough to get these things positioned, and then I'll add the rest once it's up there. I did pre-drill all the end ones though. I left this one open though, because I think I'm gonna do one out of the 8 screws as a 2.5 inch one, so it goes into the next joist, just to give it a little bit extra holding power. I'll do one of those on each bracket. Hopefully all this fits, because I really don't wanna take this down. When in doubt, clamps. All right, got a couple deck screws up there holding it. I think we're ready to do a test run of this first stringer here, just to see where she lands. Gosh, swing it around. Please don't fall. I'm gonna get up here and clamp it at the right height. That's just about the perfect height. Let's see how she looks on the bottom. That's pretty darn good. There's hardly any gap under that at all. I don't really see any gap. So that'll work perfectly. I'm well within my pad. This is gonna be a nice, long, low sloping, gradual staircase, just like the one we have inside, and we absolutely love that. So this should be really, really nice when it's all completed. Now I'm able to use my first stringer as a template. I went ahead and put a screw in about 4 spots coming down to keep these front edges lined up with this guy right here. I don't really care about the back edge, which is all over the place because these are different widths. But it's important to keep these front points lined up with the edge so that we don't have any excess crown messing us up or anything like that. A good sharp pencil makes tracing nice and easy. Trying to get as close to the stair as possible, and then we'll take the line. So there's what 5 stair risers look like. That was a heck of a lot of triangles to cut out, as you can tell by these scraps all over the ground. And while I was at it, I grabbed some 2x8 and made a few risers that I'll start to use to put this staircase together. This little piece down here is my kicker board that goes at the very bottom. Just got to attach these guys to the stringers, and this will start to look like a staircase. We are officially ready to lift these stairs up. This is gonna be awesome. Down below here, I put my kicker board on. I wrapped everything in some Moisture Shield deck tape, 2-inch tape around the perimeter of the bottom step, and then 4-inch up underneath on my kicker board. I went up to the stair header and put in 8 6-inch Simpson screws to fasten that to my main 3-ply beam, so that is gonna be solid as a rock, and also finished all the rest of the Simpson screws in the hangers. I put 1 2.5-inch screw in each one of those just for a little bit extra, because why not? The idea behind the joist tape at the bottom step is to prevent moisture from wicking up through the end grains of the stringers. It's going to be resting on a slab, although I'm going to put some composite shims underneath to just raise it up just a little bit so that it's not in direct contact. That'll preserve the tape and keep moisture from having a direct path up into the end grain. But I feel like it's a pretty low effort thing to maybe let the ends of these stringers last a little bit longer. So we'll see what happens. And of course, we'll be putting joist tape on all the rest of the stringers too once it's all in place. Now it's just a matter of rigging all this up. This is giving me flashbacks of doing the main staircase, and I have my cable winch again, except out here I'm gonna be using the skid steer for most of the heavy lifting, but I will need that cable winch to like pull the back end up to keep it balanced. So this might be a bit of a trial and error, but we'll do the best we can. Lift the handle a couple times. A little bit more. I just need it to clear the ground. All right, that's good. We need to lower it a little bit. Wish I had a side shift on this, that'd be perfect, like a forklift. Can you help stabilize it? I'm gonna come over further than I need to, and then we can push it this way. I'm gonna raise it up higher than the brackets. I mean, it's gonna do that when I come down. All right, so your job is to push it up against there from the back end. Just watch your feet. I'm gonna come down slow, but watch your feet. Second to last hole.
I can't escape this situation, 'cause I won't meet the expectation. Over mountains, across the sea.
And this, folks, is the beginning of a staircase. That went up pretty smoothly, actually. Helps a lot to have the skid steer for sure. And I got all the risers on now. I just ripped those out of 2x8s, had to rip about 1 inch off of every piece in order to get it to the right 6 13/16 riser height. Here's all the LSC hangers now that they are all fully fastened and completed. Turned out really nicely. There wasn't any issues with where that bend was like I was worried about. I used a mix of fasteners on these guys, screws in the ends to try to prevent this from splitting, and some screws in the middle depending on whether there was a bow or a cup that I needed to pull out. And then I just used framing nails pretty much everywhere else. Try to get 3 fasteners and all the 3 middle stringers, and then just these 2 screws in the outsides. Where there was any small gaps at the bottom of the stringers where it met the concrete, I slid in some small composite shims to take that gap up and leave a little bit of airspace so that water isn't wicked up into the end grain of the stringers. All the stringer tops will get joist tape eventually, like I did on this first one here, but I wanted to do this one in advance to make sure I could get it all the way around the whole bottom, because this is going to be the one most susceptible to water damage. Joist tape the bottom of my 1x4 kicker board as well, and then put a few 5/16 by 3-inch tap cons, one in each open bay. That way this cannot move relative to the concrete. Not sure if you can tell on camera, but even with all these risers fastened on, this thing is still pretty wiggly. The stringers are over 18 foot long each, and that's a pretty big span. So luckily we have planned for this, and there is a midspan support in place. I have 2 footings right below the center span mark of the joist, and now we just need to put a beam under there to support this and stiffen this up a little bit. If there's still some wiggle left, I'll probably throw some V-bracing on the bottom of the stringers as well. That should help stiffen everything up so that they can't sway like it's doing right now. This double 2x12 is gonna be my beam. Luckily I had enough offcut from the other 2x12s that I didn't need to get any extra lumber for that. This is how I'm thinking this is gonna work. I scribed a plumb line up from the back of the column here, and that's gonna give me a rough idea where that beam is gonna sit. So I'm gonna hang that with a couple clamps from this location, scribe the angle on it, should be somewhere around 32 degrees. Give that a cut, fasten it, and then I'll cut the post to match. Well, it's up there, but this is the next dilemma. There are some gaps under some, but not others. The width of these 2x12s vary quite a bit, so I think I'm gonna have to plane down the high spots down here to try to get this thing to sit on all the beams. Like this is almost a 1/2 inch gap, and this one's touching. There's like a 1/4 under that, and it's touching on the end. So something's gotta change here. I guess I could also wedge shims in there, but I think that's just tacky. Probably should cover this guy too while we're at it. It will technically be exposed to water coming through the stairs, at least a little bit. tossed a screw in the top corner of each side to just hold everything a little bit more secure. I'm just gonna mock this thing up and give it another like 1/4 inch or so on the cutout so that we put this under some compression. I might have to lift this guy up before we can get this post under here, but that's not a bad thing. At least just a little bit, just so we know we're compressed. Got my 2 posts cut out. This is my contraption for lifting this up. I really am not sure if this is gonna work or not, but we're gonna give it a shot. I think it might work. Cut these about 1/8 of an inch taller. Oh my gosh, look at that. Let's go. Beautiful. Test fit went well, so I'm gonna go ahead and cap off these with some joist tape. We'll be ready for the permanent install. Sweet. Well, I think that looks pretty good. There's really nothing but gravity holding it together right now, except for just a couple screws up here. So I marked out where we're gonna drill the 1/2 inch bolts through, just like the rest of the beams. And then I think I'm gonna drive like a 5 inch structural screw up through each one of these joists to make sure the beam stays fastened well to the joist. I was able to get 4 out of the 5 to touch from the planing operation. This is the only one that doesn't. There's probably a 3/8 gap right there. I'm just gonna put a pair of shims in there, and that's gonna have to do. Here's what I'm thinking for this connection. This is a 5 inch screw, and I'll probably drill a flat spot down here so this head isn't just trying to countersink by itself. Get a couple inches up into the stringer there. That turned out really well. And the very last step for this is to drive some nails in here to laminate the beam together, because nothing else besides these bolts are really holding it together. Moment of truth. How much did this help? Quite a bit, for sure. Before it was like a loose banana swaying out in the wind. Now it's pretty darn stiff. There's definitely some vibration you can get out of it if you're straight up kicking it sideways. So maybe I'm gonna throw a couple diagonal braces on the bottom here while I'm at it with all this framing stuff. That'll really get it stiff, hopefully. It's definitely pretty darn solid now. It's not perfect when I'm doing something like this, but in reality, that's not really a use case for the most part. There's just a little bit of very high frequency vibration, but before it was like boom, 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 boom. And now it's just like bzz, bzz, bzz every time I kick. For such a big staircase, I think this is pretty darn solid. Yeah, I'm happy with that. It's gonna be really nice. So the last thing to do here that I've been putting off is this very bottom step. I actually cut a piece of 2x6 to the right length here, but then realized that I did not want this step the same length as all the rest. We did it on our main staircase. The bottom tread wraps around and the stair post doesn't start until the second step. It just allows you to round the step a lot easier. You don't have to totally get around the corner of the stairs to get up onto the staircase. So I'm gonna do the same thing here in both directions, add another 11 inches, which is the rough tread width, on both sides so that we can easily round the stairs coming in from both directions if we're coming from the yard or if we're coming from this back door. A 2x6 is a little bit short for this riser height, which comes out to like 5 13/16. Well, this is only 5.5, but I'm okay with that because it leaves a little gap so water can't wick up into this board, and I just put some composite shims every so often underneath it so it's still nice and solid and it's gonna be a good step. I'll run the decorative fascia down much closer to the concrete to cover this gap down here. Well, I'm gonna call that a wrap on deck framing. That was a good bit of work, but it honestly didn't take that long. We just spread it out over a whole bunch of days for a few hours at a time, it seems like. I am gonna throw some temporary treads on this to make it easier to do our waterproofing and our deck boards up there. without risking dropping tools on nice treads. It's gonna be a bit of a project to do these stair treads because I'm picture framing the treads as well. I'm just ripping down some scrap material that's been used for like 500 different uses, and it's been sitting out in the weather and just really ugly. So it's going in the garbage right after it's done with this very last use, but it'll be good to have something to walk on and not risk falling through these stringers while we're working. Next up is the waterproofing system for the main deck. Never done anything like it, so that's gonna be a real learning experience, but honestly, everything on this project is a learning experience because we haven't done really any of this stuff before. So as always, thanks for watching, and we will see you on the next one.
Trying to be